All right, welcome to the Balanced Hormones Empowered Women podcast. I am your host, Abby Vallejo, registered dietitian, certified personal trainer, and health coach. I teach women of all ages how to align their diet, their lifestyle, and their exercise with their hormones in order to unlock their most vibrant health in a feminine-based approach about working smarter and not harder. And today I'm so happy to have on my good friend and partner in crime, Katie Schalk. She's a wellness director at the YMCA, and she's a nationally certified personal trainer and health coach. And Katie and I have a lot of history together, working together, learning together, and kind of intertwining health journey. So I absolutely had to get Katie on to share her story. Katie, I would love for you to give us like some background on your health journey and like what that has been like for you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on here. I'm super excited to share
Yeah,
my story and
yes.
help others too to be their best selves. So, my journey started, back when I turned 40, actually. Um, Before I turned 40, everything was going great. I was at my top peak performance. I was running ultra marathons. I was strength training every day. I was at my peak, but my best shape of my life, my perfect weight, all the things. And I was
Mhm,
killing it. And
mhm.
then I turned 40 and it seems like everything hit the wall. I
But
noticed
nothing changed. Like you didn't change any of your
nothing.
habits. You were doing all the same thing, and suddenly you woke up and it just like what you had been always doing wasn't working anymore.
Yes, and it felt like it was just 24 hours and it started, but really at 40 everything changed and I ate on point, I exercised on point. I mean, I was running ultra marathons for the love and strength training every day and everything that I seemed to be doing wasn't working anymore. I started gaining weight out of nowhere. It seemed after I turned 40, I gained probably 15 to 20 pounds out of nowhere, and nothing had changed. I was very healthy. Um, and it was all coming on around the midsection. I felt chunky and like my digestion started to freak out. I was diagnosed at age 20 with IBS and as lactose intolerant, but I had it super under control. I hadn't had issues with it for years until I turned 40. And as the years went on in my 40s, everything just kept getting worse. I had all these horrible symptoms. I felt horrible. I was super fatigued. My gut was not functioning well. I was super constipated. Um, my stomach hurt after I ate everything and anything. I felt like I couldn't eat food. I was scared to eat most of the time. I was gassy, I was bloated. It didn't seem like any food that I ate worked in my system. I really became petrified to eat. Um, and I didn't know what to do about it. So the first thing I did, I think the first thing we all do is go to our doctors and ask what's wrong with me.
Right, right. So what like did they run any tests or like what did they do when you went to the doctor?
Yeah, so I went for my physical and that's when I brought it up. And you could see, I mean, the scale was up probably about 18 pounds by that point since the year before. So obviously there's something not right there. And I asked, I said, what's going on here? Something's wrong. I don't know what's wrong, but something's wrong. I'm eating perfectly. I'm exercising like crazy and something's wrong. And I just got the speech that I'm in perimenopause. And it's too bad that I'm going to have this is what all the women in perimenopause deal with. And there's not much they can do for me. I'm going to have to suffer through it. And I'm not alone. Everyone has to go through it. But this is what perimenopause is. And
Even
I
though you were telling them like I can't eat, and so before you were just lactose intolerant, right? But it sounds like you kind of able to tolerate everything else besides that pretty decently. And then suddenly now you just weren't really tolerating anything at all, like getting bloated with everything you ate, sounds like.
Right, exactly. And they did at that point send me to a GI specialist from that appointment because that they didn't think was technically related to perimenopause. So let's go fix the gut. So
The gut doesn't, it is part of the body. It's the separate thing over there.
yeah, exactly. It's like totally separate. Shut that door, and that's the on the other side. So I went to a GI specialist, and of course, they were baffled. And of course, they do all the normal things they would do. They tried to put me on some medication medication. They tried to put me on acid, like antacids to block the
Yes.
acid reflux
Yes.
I was having. And the medication they put me on actually was horrible and ended up making me do things like sleepwalk and stuff like that.
Oh,
So
no.
horrible. And it did not help my gut at all. I still couldn't eat anything. And then they told me after I went back and said, this isn't working. Then they told me I needed to try the FODMAP diet, which is meaning that I can't tolerate carbs or digestion of simple carbs. So the FODMAP diet makes you, it's an elimination diet. So you,
It's a very strict elimination diet. Yeah. And it's really only supposed to be done for like a few months at a time, really just to kind of bring that inflammation down. And then you're supposed to add things back in. So they had
exactly.
you start doing that.
Yep, I did that for the amount of time they told me to, a few months, and that changed nothing. I still was having
Yeah.
massive issues with food. And it was so strict too. I mean, I'll say those elimination diets are so hard to live by. But you do
Yeah. Like
anything.
what were you actually eating? Like what could you actually eat when you were doing that?
Yeah, they gave you a list. So I had a very specific list of foods that were I was able to eat and very specific foods that I was not able to eat. And I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but all I remember is I would carry this list around with me and literally look at the list and pick off the foods on the list that I was able to eat, and the ones that I was not able to eat, I had to stay away from. I know, for example, like as far as fruits go, I was only allowed to eat berry fruits. So like strawberries, raspberries, blueberries. Um, and I know I was allowed to eat protein like chicken and steak and meat. So that was
Mm.
safe. But carbs were a very tricky thing in that diet. I really had to eliminate most carbs. I know I could have a little bit of sweet potatoes, but I had to eliminate quite a bit of carbs and even a lot of vegetables. That was the hardest part for me because I love vegetables, and half
Yeah.
the vegetables I ate were on the list.
Yeah.
So I had to eliminate like asparagus, and I had to eliminate broccoli, and I had to eliminate tomatoes and a whole bunch of other ones. So it made it very hard to get to eat right. It was just very tricky, but I did it because you want to feel better.
Right.
And
Right.
the end of that was that I just didn't feel better. It didn't
Didn't
work.
make any difference.
Nope. And so I started adding the foods back in anyways. And then I was like, me being the researcher I am, and I am an avid researcher, and I don't like to take no for an answer. So when they told me, oh, there's nothing we can do for you, it's perimenopause, I was like, oh, no, 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 no.
Think about that.
Yep. And
I
after
love
I
that.
tried the gut protocol that didn't work, and after I tried all the meds and I
Mhm.
felt worse on the acid blockers, and
Of course.
yeah, so that's when I went to Abby and I was like, "Okay, girlfriend, you and I have to figure this out together because
Yep.
I'm not doing this and this is not okay."
Yep.
And that's when we started down the road, and this was like 8 years ago. And the first thing we did was I got gut testing done. I did the GI map,
Yep. The
because that's
stool
where,
test.
yeah,
Yep.
it's the
I
stool
remember
test.
that.
That's where I was having the most issues. So we thought we'd start there. And I did the GI map, and there were things that came up. I did have candida. And I think that was my main big issue from the GI map was
Yeah.
candida.
I think that was like the main big
Yep.
thing.
There
Hence like
wasn't
the
really
bloating.
anything
Yeah.
else. Yeah, and that
Yeah.
that was a problem. So, we addressed the candida. I did go on the candida diet. I did get all the supplements that go with candida. I did, like a champ, follow everything and did all
Yep.
the
Yep.
things. And there were some things that did help me feel better, like bitters. I use bitters before I eat, and I still use bitters to this day. I love the
Love
bitters. They
bitters. Yep.
super, super help with my digestion. And I did HCL for a while to build up my stomach acid. And I think one of the biggest problems of me having acid reflux is I had low stomach acid.
And
And
I think people often don't realize that usually goes hand in hand. Like we're kind of led to
exactly.
believe like, oh, you have acid reflux, you have too much acid, when in fact it's usually the opposite. You usually don't have enough, and then it manifests at inappropriate times, or it doesn't get acidic enough to actually close off that sphincter so that it can't reflux like up the esophagus. So yeah, I think and just That's such a good point too, is that so often we need to start with fixing digestion and healing digestion as like our step one. And it's so basic that I think sometimes it just gets discounted for all these other fancy things, right? So for sure, that
Exactly.
makes perfect sense. Like getting your stomach acid back to healthy levels, taking bitters to help kind of support your whole digestive tract. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And so that was key to the beginning of my journey. That's when things really started to move in the right direction. Um, but also too, when I did like the candida diet, that's another very restrictive diet. So again,
There you go again with
yep,
all the restriction. And it's just it's so hard to live that way. And the problem with the candida diet, not that I'm against it, but at the same time, as long as you do the candida diet, you might be getting results, but then you go off of it and it's like suddenly it comes back, if you're not fixing the root cause of the problem. So it's like, and I just kind of want to tie this back really quick to stomach acid too, because a lot of times I see this so often, clients, women will come in and they're having gut issues, like they're having like, yeast and candida overgrowth, and they've been on acid blockers, or they don't have enough stomach acid, or
yeah,
they've had their gallbladder removed, right? All
yes,
things that lower stomach acid. And suddenly, because think about it, stomach acid, for our listeners, stomach acid not only helps you digest our food, but it's protective. It kills all that yeast and bacteria that could come in, from your mouth, from your food, that could come in and colonize. And if you don't have good levels of that, it won't keep you protected. So that then those pathogens, those microbes can get through and they can colonize in your gut and cause all kinds of problems. So it's like you're missing your first line of defense, which is your stomach acid. So usually the first thing that we do is we go in and we correct that, bring up those levels of stomach acid to a healthy amount, and then it kind of stops that problem from happening further down the chain, and then that yeast and those microbes can't colonize. So that
exactly.
absolutely makes sense. I just wanted to like make that
Yeah.
connection there.
And I think about all those people that I've talked to since that are on antacids and they're having issue with acid reflux
Mhm.
things. And I just want to tell all of you, check your stomach acid
Oh,
levels.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is
Yes, if you're
definitely,
having digestive issues, if you've had your gallbladder removed, if you're getting bloated all the time, if you have like a really low appetite or you get full really fast, those are common things.
yeah,
Check your stomach acid, or consider supplementing with some hydrochloric acid, HCl, and some enzymes, because that can just make a whole world of difference in fixing and healing your digestion. Yes, good point.
absolutely. And so definitely look into that. I definitely want you to know that it's a different problem than the acid. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, so that did start my journey, and the bitters and the HCl really helped. And the candida diet, when I was on it, I actually did feel good, but
Hmm.
it was getting off. Like Abby said, that was the problem is you can only do that restrictive diet for so long, and then you have to
Yep.
start adding food back in. And when
Hmm.
I started adding food back in, I had problems again. And it was kind of a crossroads where you're kind of like, well, now what do I do? I've done everything there is to fix my gut. I feel like food is my enemy. I feel like I can't eat anything. I was afraid to eat, or I was just prepared that when I did eat, I was going to be in pain all the time. And it's
Yep.
so awful. I remember describing to Abby that when after I would eat, I would feel like there was a softball in my stomach. It would
Yeah.
just, and it would hurt. And it felt so like my food wasn't moving. It was stuck.
Yeah.
I kept saying, my food is stuck. It's just right there. I can feel it.
Yeah. I remember you saying there's like a rock in here.
Yes, there's a rock in my stomach.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't moving. So,
Yeah.
then Abby and I started researching, and I'm so thankful for her in this journey of figuring this out together and all the research we've done to figure this out over the years, because it's been many years of trying to research and be on podcasts and listen to all these things to find the connections between things. And I think that's something that's really important to know, that usually, like for example, in my journey, I thought my gut was the problem, when as we move along in my journey, I found out the gut was just a product of the problem. It wasn't the
Yes.
direct issue. And um as we're getting closer to figuring out what this was, I also was on the pill at the time, and my
Yep. I
doctor,
was gonna say, talk to me about birth control, because that I
yes,
know that was in there too.
yep. So as I was going to the GI specialist and trying to figure out I did the GI map then, and I'm trying to figure out the gut stuff. I also was going to a gynecologist and an OBGYN, and I was trying to figure out what was going on with all my other stuff because I was having severe pain in my lower abdomen, and I was having nasty cramps. I mean, my periods were horrible, and my periods always have been horrible, but they were getting even worse. I was having the worst periods, and they were super heavy and they were super long. And I would have the worst cramps in the whole world, to the point where like I couldn't even go to work some days. And then I was getting migraines during that my period and around my period. I have never gotten migraines before in my life until after I turned 40. And then I was getting migraines with my period, and they were so bad. I would have to call into work and call into whatever. And I couldn't leave the dark room. And it was just awful. And again, I'm like, what is happening to me? I'm falling apart.
Why am I falling apart?
Why am I falling apart? I'm a
And so many
healthy.
women, yeah, and exactly. And that's why I wanted you to share this story, because so many women are, they turn 40, or, in their 40s, they go into perimenopause, their hormone levels start to fluctuate, and suddenly they literally feel like they're falling apart and like there's
Yes.
something wrong with them, when it's really just, a hormonal imbalance is happening.
Right. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, I am a nationally certified personal trainer. I have a degree in this. I am a nationally
Yes.
certified health coach. I know what I'm
Yes.
doing. My eating's
Yes.
on par. My everything is on par. Why am
Yeah.
I falling apart?
Exactly.
So, yeah. So the period thing, I went to an OBGYN gynecologist, and of course they put me on a new pill. I was on a pill before, but they put me on a new pill, like a form of progestin, that actually stopped me from having a period altogether.
So
Um,
progestin, for our listeners, progestin is a synthetic progesterone. So, the main two female sex hormones, obviously there's estrogen. Well, there's a few different types of estrogen, and then there's progesterone. And we kind of tend to just say, oh, I'm on the progesterone pill. But when it's synthetic, which the birth control pill is, that's progestin. So it was a synthetic form of progesterone called progestin. And
yes.
that's in many forms of the birth control pill.
Yes, and it kind of doesn't fit into your body. It's like a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. And it stopped me from having my periods. So and for the doctor, they thought that was a good solution because
Oh yeah, because perfect. No more heavy period. Awesome.
I
Gone.
took that away. And also I did have endometriosis. I was diagnosed with that, and it was for the longest time under control, but it did come back in my 40s, which is
Of course it
common.
did.
So yep, along with all the other stuff that I was having. So might as
hmm
well just stack that on top of it. So
hmm
yeah, my endometriosis is back. So that was another way that they thought they could stop the endometriosis, because the synthetic progestin does help stop or slow grow the
Yeah,
endometriosis.
well, but what it does is it just suppresses everything. It suppresses your own body's hormone production so much that you're barely making any of your own hormones anymore. So, for
Yes.
all of us women who have been on some form of birth control pill, this happens to all of us to to varying degrees. But same thing for me. Let me just insert this story really quickly. I was on a birth control pill as well in my teens and early 20s. And later, when I tested my hormones after that, I had nothing, like just depleted, because what it does is it basically, because you're putting in synthetic versions of hormones, your body basically stops making its own. And so
Yep.
you could be, 20, 25, and suddenly you look like you're postmenopausal because your body's just not making its own hormones. And yet, this is touted as a positive thing, for someone to say like Katie, who had endometriosis or, other problems, heavy periods. So it was like, great, we'll just have you stop getting a period and problem solved. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually fix the root cause of the problem. So, I mean, I'm not against birth control per se. I know there's no perfect solution for women. I've been on it, a lot of us have been on it. It just kind of is what it is. But it's just, the education around this and understanding that if you go on birth control to quote unquote fix a problem that you're dealing with, it's not actually going to fix the problem. It's just going to suppress it. And then when you go off the birth control, it's going to come back. And we're going to get to that because
Yes.
that happened to you as well, didn't it?
Yes,
Okay,
it
sorry. Keep going with your story.
did. Sure did. Yeah. So once they put me on this progestin, I was on it for a couple of years. And at first I thought, okay, I'm not getting a period. That's nice.
It
My
probably was, honestly. I mean, it's
Yeah,
always kind of
the
exciting,
relief.
especially if you have bad periods, like, oh, great, I'm not getting them anymore. How did
But
you feel during that time? And like, what kind of symptoms, if any, did you
yeah,
experience?
yeah, that was the thing, is that it was nice I wasn't getting a period, but other things started to happen. Like my weight just kept going up. And that was the big thing. It's like I'm getting heavier and heavier, and the scale's
Mhm.
continuing to go up. And I'm like, How is this possible? I,
What's
I
happening?
I have done all these elimination diets. I'm barely
Mhm,
eating.
mhm,
I have
mhm,
like, I'm still exercising like crazy,
mhm.
and the scale just continues to go up. How can I run 40 miles in a race and have my weight go up?
Yeah, I mean, Katie is a serious athlete, you guys. So when she says she's working out, she means business.
And it was just so bewildering to me. I'm like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
And then I started to feel extremely tired all the time. I was so fatigued. I mean, fatigued to the point where I could barely get through work. I would get to about 3 o'clock and I felt like I needed to take a nap. And oftentimes I would go home from work and have to take a nap. And then I could barely get myself out of the nap and then and sometimes I just laid in bed and wanted to sleep the rest of the night. That is not me. I have never been that girl. I have
Yeah.
always been a doer, doer, doer till the last nth hour. And for me to have no energy and be so fatigued, something was definitely wrong.
Yep.
And I just remember feeling sad all the time. And I started to get signs and symptoms of extreme anxiety and then depression. I have never had depression in my whole entire life. I've always been prone a little bit to anxiety, but it's always been under control. I have never felt like that before, where I felt almost a little hopeless. I felt like this is just
Yeah.
going to be me the rest of my
Yeah.
life. And this is
Yeah.
all
Like it's never gonna get better. It's just
ever.
gonna be like
Yeah.
this from here on out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? That is so connected to hormones too. Like you mentioned the migraines, you mentioned the mood. That it is so important for us to have healthy levels of hormones, especially like progesterone, the natural version, the kind that our body makes, because it helps regulate our mood and it helps prevent things like migraines and horrible periods. And so when we get to perimenopause, usually progesterone is that first hormone that starts to decline, especially if we have a really kind of fast-paced, stressful life. And then suddenly we're getting migraines or headaches, or we're having trouble with our mood, we're feeling anxious, we're starting to feel depressed, maybe estrogen levels are kind of depleting or going up and down in that perimenopause, and that is affecting our neurotransmitters, our ability to feel happy and stable and normal. And suddenly we start to feel crazy or maybe depressed. And, at this point, so many women go in and they're often prescribed an antidepressant when it's really hormones.
I was.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that was the other thing is at that point again, I was at another all-time low. So I went back to the doctor and said, I do not feel good. I don't feel like myself. I'm depressed. I don't, I'm anxious. And then of course they prescribed me an anxiety medication.
Yep. Yep. Antidepressant or anti-anxiety at that point. Yep.
Mhm.
Those are,
And
mhm.
I took it. But it did not help anything. It didn't do anything. In fact, it got
Yeah.
to the point where I'm like, this is dumb. So I got off of it. And then I went to Abby again. I'm like, okay, plan B. We have to check my hormones.
And I was like, yes, we do.
Yeah.
I'm happy you asked.
And that is when I did the hormone test. I did the Dutch hormone test with Abby, and I literally was in a very desperate place. I was at my lowest. I was starting to not be able to run my distances that I normally run, and I was starting to feel pretty discouraged. And so we tested my hormones. I did the Dutch hormone test and got the results back, and they were shocking, absolutely shocking. I
It's
remember,
shocking and not shocking, right?
right,
Because it was like shocking to see, but then when we like tied it in with all the symptoms and the way you'd been feeling, everything made perfect sense.
right. I remember Abby sitting down with me, and the first thing she said was, are you sure you're ready for this? I don't know how you're functioning right now.
Literally, like I remember you were like dead on your feet, and yet you're like, going about your life and being, the director at the Y and doing this and that. And I was just like,
Being a
I
single
don't know how
mom.
you're functioning. Like, I would be dead right now.
And so it turns out from this test, we saw that all of my hormones were pretty tanked. I had very little estrogen, very little progesterone, very little testosterone. My cortisol levels were tanked, which means like I literally had almost no cortisol. You're
Well,
supposed to
let's make a note about this because I feel like so many people are like, cortisol is bad. I don't want it to be too high. Low cortisol is good. That's what I'm going for. Why isn't that true though? Do you want to tell them
Oh,
why?
yes. You don't want your cortisol tanked. And literally mine was like a flat line through the whole day and went down, and I was like under the radar. And that means I absolutely had nothing left in the tank. I was in exhaustive phase.
Yep.
I had absolutely no energy. That's why I was fatigued all the time.
Yep.
You have to have some cortisol. There is a natural element of how cortisol works. It gets you up in the morning, it spikes a couple hours after you wake up, and then it slowly is supposed to come down through the day. You need cortisol to
That gives
function.
you energy in the morning to get up and
Absolutely.
function and respond and do what you need to do. And then it tapers
Yeah.
off and gets low at night so you can relax and then go to bed. And this happens every day. So when we think, oh, high cortisol is bad, low cortisol is good, it's a little bit of an oversimplification because you actually need different levels of cortisol at different times of the day. So you need, and it's kind of like gas in your tank. You need to have enough in the tank to be able to accomplish what you need to do. Obviously, we don't want you to be, producing extremely elevated levels of cortisol ongoing because of like an ongoing stressful situation. Yes, then you will end up getting depleted. And in fact, that's what was going on with Katie, is that she had a very high paced, stressful life. So her body was pumping out cortisol, cortisol, cortisol at high levels. And then suddenly she didn't have any gas left in her tank. And when that happens, it's kind of like a spectrum where suddenly you go from being stressed. And then the next one is usually kind of wired and tired, we call it, where you're still kind of stressed and wired, but then you kind of start to get tired. And then it just passes into burnout, where you're just exhausted. No amount of sleep will refresh you. You just feel dead on your feet because you literally have nothing left. So she was low in all of her hormones. And
Mhm.
she didn't have enough cortisol to give her that energy boost and, get her going throughout the day. So, yeah, she was in a very low place with nothing left, basically.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
I was exhausted. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I didn't want to. I wanted to sleep all the time, napping, fatigued, everything. So seeing the results of that was actually almost refreshing. Abby was scared for me to look at it, and I'm like, this makes so much sense.
She's like, thank you.
I finally know what's happening.
Yeah, well, it's like you're not crazy and nothing's wrong with you. You're just depleted.
Right.
And I feel like I tell so many women that who come in, especially around that age, they're always like, there's something wrong with me. I'm crazy. I'm like, nope, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just depleted. Your hormones are out of balance and it's enough to just throw your whole life out of whack.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I am fully convinced that because my hormones were so tanked and my cortisol was so tanked, that's why my gut was having issues, because everything is interrelated. And usually, um, all of those things are because of another. So if you're not fixing
Always.
the actual problem, you're
Yep.
not going to fix the other symptoms that you're getting. So the reason why my gut wasn't getting any better is because I didn't have any gas left in my tank for my body to even heal anything. And
Exactly.
so the hormones were the problem. I had to fix the adrenals. I had to fix the hormones in order for my gut to have a safe place to heal. So that is another thing I want everybody to know, is that we often go with the first symptom we see or feel, and we're like, that's the problem. That's it.
Yeah. Or like
I
the
have
loudest
that.
speaking one.
Yes.
Yeah.
When really you have to look at the whole picture, and you have to look at what's downstream or upstream, and
Right.
what's the main problem that's
Right.
actually
Yeah.
causing all of those.
Yeah,
And
what's the root? And I feel like living in a high stress situation and being in that fight or flight is such a common one because so many people are. And we as humans, we're so adaptable that we kind of adapt to that. We're like, I'm not really that stressed. I'm not really that stressed. You know what I
I'm
mean?
fine. I'm dealing with it.
Right. Like we're over here like neurotic and hyper functioning, but we think that we're fine because society tells us like do that function anyway, right?
Right.
But you can't be healthy in that permanent state of fight or flight. We're not meant to live in that state. Your body won't heal and repair itself in that state. You won't make adequate levels of hormones in that state. You can't digest your food in that state. So if you're living in that state almost all the time, over time, things are going to start to go wrong,
Right.
basically. So,
Right. And
yeah.
I think a lot of people, when we talk about stress and a stressful life and stress triggers and all of that, stress can come from so many different areas and places. It doesn't have to be the big things. It doesn't have to be like a death or like, something huge like that. Oftentimes, it's like dying by a thousand paper cuts, um you have all these components in your life and they just keep filling up the bucket, and that toxic load just keeps going up and up and up in your bucket. So it can be a thousand little things, but that's still big stressors and that's still a big problem. So you have to deal with all those little stressors too, as well as the big ones in your life, in order to really get back your body back to a place where it feels comfortable to heal.
Yeah, you gotta feel safe. And I mean, the good news is you don't have to eliminate stress. I mean, that's impossible, but we also
Right.
don't have to. But it's like we have to change our perspective and our mindset and how we're able to handle stress. Like we increase
Right.
our resiliency. So the stress is still going to be out there, but it's all in, how we respond to it. And that makes all the difference in the world.
And bring down that toxic load and bring
Yep.
and take those out of the bucket.
Yep.
So your body then feels like it can come out of fight and flight, and it can really get into rest and digest, and you can have that balance of
Hmm.
the nervous system,
Yep.
where your body feels safe enough to heal.
That is
So
so key.
yeah. So when we discovered my hormones were so tanked and my cortisol was so tanked, we started off, and then this happens in phases, right? So I want all the women to know out there, it's not like a quick fix. You have to do the protocol. And my first step was fixing and building up my adrenal glands that produce my hormones, and really getting my energy levels up so my body has enough energy to be able to work on the hormones and heal. So we started working on the adrenals, and I took a bunch of supplements for the adrenals, and it can be different for everybody. So there's no like one protocol for adrenals. It depends on the signs and symptoms of each person, but there's a lots of ways to fix the adrenal glands. And so I started working on that. And I'll tell you, a few months into that protocol alone, I felt like a whole new person. It was life changing for me.
Yep. Yep.
Energy level started to increase. I did not have to take naps anymore. I felt empowered and powerful. I felt like me again. And the other thing that was really important to note during this time of fixing the adrenals is I went off birth control completely. Abby and I decided, after seeing how tanked my hormones were, birth control does not help to fix hormones. And if I needed to really target and fix my hormones, I had to get off the hormones. So I
Yeah,
had,
I'm glad you brought that up. It is really hard to fix hormonal imbalances when a woman is still on birth control because basically anything you do, even with, natural bioidentical hormones, like the birth control will negate it basically. So if your hormones are tanked and messed up and you're on birth control, hormonal birth control, let me say, unfortunately, to really truly heal that and fix that, you do need to find a non-hormonal version and get off of that birth control pill, which thankfully Katie was able to do. And then so yeah, and that's when you started to see a real difference, when then we could actually enact protocols to support your hormones and it would actually do something. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So that's when the game started to change, is when I started to fix my adrenals, got off the birth control, although it was a process. And I'm going to tell you, so the minute I got off the birth control, um, about a month later or so, I had like the worst period of my entire life. I had a period for like 36 days straight. And it was all
So you hadn't been getting periods, right? You for
like
years you had been on this
years.
progestin pill that made you not get a period, and then you
Mhm.
went off the birth control pill, and within a month or two you got a period that lasted for 36 days. So talk to us about that.
It was awful. It was
I
like it was so heavy. Again, like it came back with a vengeance. It was
Oh
like,
yeah.
okay, I didn't give you a
I'm
period for
back.
2 years, and now I'm coming back.
It was
Take it.
angry.
It was
You've
angry.
suppressed me for too long. I'm back with a vengeance.
Now I'm gonna tell you about it.
Mm,
So it came back with a vengeance, and it was 36 days long. I bled for 36 days. That's horrible. It's horrible.
yes.
and it
Yes.
was so heavy, and everything came back. I mean, my migraines came back and all the things came back, and the cramps were awful. And I'm like, okay, this is not what I signed up for.
Right,
However,
right. This is not what's supposed to be happening.
right, right, right. And I did end up then having to get my iron checked because I was bleeding so much, and I ended
Yeah.
up becoming anemic from it.
Yep.
But that's okay, because you know what? My body, I feel like, was just, it needed to do this. It needed to process it out. It was part of this plan to like get my body regulated again.
Mhm.
So as
Mhm.
much as it was awful, and I never want to do that again,
And you
it
don't have to, like
right,
you went through it and that was that. And
right,
if you think of the menstrual cycle as kind of like a mini detox that women go through every month, it's kind of like a purge that we go through. And so if we go for years and we don't give our body that opportunity, often when it does come back, it will that first time usually come back with a vengeance, and you'll bleed a lot. And those symptoms that the pill was suppressing will suddenly come back, back into play because all of it was just suppressed. And then suddenly it's like, back with a vengeance. So yeah.
absolutely. Well, that was awful. However, I will tell you that I have learned then, as Abby and I were working together to solve all these problems, I really learned at that moment to have grace in the process.
Yes.
And I think that if I could tell everybody one thing, that this is a journey and it's not an overnight fix, and it definitely doesn't happen in a week or a month. It takes several months, even up to a year or more for some, to get your body back in balance. And I think so many women are hung up on, I need to lose the weight, I need to lose the weight, I need to lose the weight. And I felt like that too. Like, I wanted the weight off. I mean, I was super tired of how I
Yeah.
was feeling.
Yeah.
I wanted it off too. But in this process, when we started fixing my hormones, and I realized how tanked my body was, and I realized how my body was just rebelling, I really, really needed to start forgiving my body. I really needed to start giving my body grace and a safe place to heal. And I know that might sound silly for some, but that is when really the game started to change for me, is when I stopped thinking about weight loss. I stopped thinking about, oh my gosh, I still have to lose this 15 to 20 pounds. And I started to think about, what do I need to do? What other things can I do to help heal my body in this process of fixing my hormones, getting my cycle regulated, and starting to feel good again? And, that's when I started to add in some of the biohacks that Abby and I are like definitely fans of. And we'll probably save that for another
Oh
podcast.
yeah, that's going
But
to be a whole nother podcast in itself because I feel
yes,
like there's so much to talk about there. But yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
There are some wonderful biohacks that are easy and free or low cost things that you can just do. And we will definitely go into that. But
Yeah.
I love that you were brave enough and to give yourself grace and to let yourself go through that. Because honestly, like, had you known that that was going to happen, oh my gosh, I mean, what woman wants to face that, right? And I feel like we
Right.
live in a society that tells us that symptoms are bad and that we should suppress them at all costs. So what if in that moment you had panicked and you had gone back on the pill and, suppressed things again, and but you had the bravery to actually let your body have its say, have its purge, do what it, needed to do, and then also smart enough to, bring in the iron and obviously, correct
Yes.
the anemia, but you gave it a chance to actually rebalance. And
Yes.
that is
I
listening to
trusted the
your,
process.
yes, trusting the process. And I think that's such a part of, that embodied innate feminine wisdom is our bodies are so wise. And if we give them a chance instead of like, directing them along and micromanaging, but we actually give them a chance to thrive and come back into balance, they will. Now, yes, obviously sometimes we need help. Like we did a protocol for Katie's adrenals. We did a protocol for her hormones. We gave her iron because she was bleeding so much. We did things to bring her back into health, and she was very dedicated with that. But her body did it. Then, once we did those things, those were the tools that her body needed to recover. And look at you now.
Yes. So now, and the funny thing is, once I started all of that and I really, really gave myself grace, and I started to implement all the biohacks that relieved my stress and brought my stress level back down, and really became back to the basics. I mean, really, honestly, back to the basics of healing myself. I did all the work. The magical thing is the weight came off all by itself. I literally like looked in the mirror one day and I said, and I looked and I thought, huh, kind of look like I'm thinner. Hmm. And
It just like kind of effortlessly all started falling off at that point.
yeah, and I
Yes.
wasn't even paying attention to it.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
remember that day where I looked in the mirror and I'm like, something's different. And then
Mhm.
I went on, and I hadn't weighed myself at all through this entire
Yep.
process, by the way. I just stayed away from the scale because I didn't feel like it was going to give me the feedback I needed at the moment.
Right.
So that's where I tell you grace in the process is very important. You have to love yourself and you have to really be like, I trust this. I trust the process. I know that this is going to work for me. I have to give it time and know that the time that I'm going to give this is going to be what I need. So I noticed that once I started to see that the weight was coming off, then I got on the scale because then I was curious and I'm like, okay, let me just see what's happening here. And I got on the scale and like that, I lost 10 pounds. I mean, I was
Nice.
then and then I didn't even do anything else different, and then the weight
Mhm.
just kept coming off, and
Yep.
right now, I'm only 2 pounds away from what I weighed when I was, 30 years old.
That's
So,
amazing.
yep, just 2 pounds away. I got 2 more pounds to go, and I don't even care if I lose the 2 pounds, like,
Right.
because I am feeling amazing. I
Energy's back.
Energy's back. I feel unstoppable. I
Mhm.
feel like powerful. I
Yes.
feel like I could take on the world, and
Yes.
I'm going to, because once
Yes.
I had this story, so I can help other women out there
I
who feel
love
like
that.
me and
That's
and
perfect.
don't
I
have
love that. That's why we go through these experiences, isn't it? So then we can
yes.
learn the wisdom and then share that wisdom with our community. So I think you've already kind of answered this, but I was going to say, what advice would you give to other women who maybe find themselves like on the front end of, where you were in your journey? What would you tell them?
Yeah. So first of all, give yourself grace in the process. I mean, you have to be okay with the journey. You can't go from 0 to 60 in 2.2 seconds. Think about all the years it takes for you to get in that place. I mean, perimenopause is like a 10 to 15 year, point in time. So you can't just fix it right away. You have to give yourself grace, and you do have to look at the hormones. You do have to look at all the issues and the symptoms you're having. Get your hormones tested, you know,
Absolutely.
and then do the protocol, but be patient on the journey. I can't tell you enough. Supplements take a long time. It's not a medication that you take one day and you feel good the next.
Right.
Supplements take time and you have to be consistent. So that's the other thing I would say is be consistent. Take your time. Don't think about the weight loss. The weight loss is naturally going to happen when your body starts to heal. When your body starts to feel safe, that weight is going to come off. It's like magic. Um, but you definitely, get your hormones checked. Check with us. We can help you. I think you're not alone. Oh my gosh. And we need to be talking about this stuff. And we
We
shouldn't
do.
be
We do need to be
afraid.
talking about this. And that's exactly why I started this podcast. That's exactly why I wanted to have you on to share your story because women need to know this. I feel like in the past, this stuff was so hush hush. We didn't talk about it. It was like shameful or embarrassing. We didn't have resources. Maybe we didn't have answers. And that all is changing now. And the way that we change this is by sharing our stories, by, sharing our wisdom. And that's what Katie and I are here to do. We've both been through digestive and hormonal challenges. We've turned those around in our own life. We specialized in these areas and now we're teaching other women to do the same. So thank you
Absolutely.
so much for sharing that. That was such a powerful story. Oh my gosh. I love how
You.
you took that from pain to purpose.
Yes, that is it. Pain to purpose. And
Beautiful.
we can help so many other people because you don't have to feel alone out there and
You're not alone.
you're
That's
not
that's
alone.
that's
And
such
there's
a great
ways
message.
to tackle everything that's going on with you naturally. And there are ways to get your body back in balance so you feel this amazing too. And
Right. You don't have to live like that forever. If you're
no,
in one of those states like Katie was, it doesn't have to be like that forever. Even if it feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, trust me, there is.
right.
And we can get you there.
Right, we can get you there, and it's worth it. The journey is worth it,
It's
and
worth it. It's
stick with
so
the
worth it. I mean, if think about it, where could you be 6 months from now or a year from now? Like if you start today, right? Like
right,
so much better. Yeah.
right,
So on that note, if this has been helpful, share it with other women in your life because that's how we learn, right? One woman tells another, tells another, tells another, and that's how we do better for ourselves.
absolutely. I'm so thankful to share my story with all of you, and I hope it gives you some hope, that this could be you a year from now, feeling amazing.
Yes. I love it. Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you so much for sharing this. I really appreciated it.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and thank you for tuning in.